Good evening. Thank you. My name is Junko Habu, and I am the chair of the Center for Japanese Studies at UC Berkeley. On behalf of the Center for Japanese Studies, I would like to welcome you to the award ceremony of the Berkeley Japan Prize. The CJS Berkeley Japan Prize is a lifetime achievement award from our center given to an individual who has made significant contributions to enriching the understanding of Japan on the global stage. The previous 4 recipients are Haruki Murakami, Hayao Miyazaki, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and Takaaki Kajita. Today, I'm delighted to introduce internationally acclaimed novelist and playwright, Ms. YU Miri, as the recipient of the 5th Berkeley Japan Prize. So as the chair of the center, it is my pleasure to award the certificate to Ms. YU Miri. And after receiving the award, YU Miri will deliver an acceptance speech. This will be followed by a conversation with Karen Tei Yamashita, a world-renowned Japanese-American writer and professor emerita at UC Santa Cruz. The conversation will be moderated by Andrew Leong, assistant professor of the English department of our university. YU Miri is a citizen of South Korea. She was born and grew up in Japan, and she writes her works in Japanese. Her family's cinema received the 1997 Akutagawa Prize, and as you know, it's the most prestigious literary award in Japan. Her 2004 novel, End of August, whose protagonist is modeled after her marathon runner grandfather, vividly describes the injustice, indignity, and hardships that he, his family, and many Korean people had to suffer during and after the Japanese occupation of Korea. The English version of End of August will appear in summer 2023. YU Miri's Tokyo Ueno Station was conceived as a link between the pain of homeless people in Tokyo's Ueno Park and the pain experienced by evacuees after the Great East Japan earthquake of 2011. While YU Miri's books depict harsh realities and the pain of individuals under extreme conditions, underlying her writings is a sense of hope. By advocating for individual freedom and dignity, her books continue to give courage to many people around the world who struggle to survive and fight against social injustice, exclusion, and inequality. Everybody, please help me welcome Ms. YU Miri. University of California. Well, I think I need a microphone. That's what happens. University of California, Berkeley, Center for Japanese Studies hereby presents the Berkeley Japan Prize 2022 to Ms. YU Miri for visionary and genre-defying work as a writer, advocating for individual freedom and dignity, and promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion. Junko Habu, Chair, Center for Japanese Studies, and Carol Christ, Chancellor of the University of California, Berkeley.
ユーミリです。ユーミリおよびユーミリの作品をバークリー日本賞に選んでくださりありがとうございます。賞の名称に国名が含まれているので、日本という国名に対する私の屈託からお話ししようと思います。大韓民国と朝鮮民主主義人民共和国の国籍を持ちながら、さまざまな事情で日本にとどまっている在日韓国朝鮮人は現在48万人います。私はその在日韓国朝鮮人の一人です。
Hello, my name is YU Miri. I am grateful that you have selected YU Miri and YU Miri's works to receive the Berkeley Japan Prize. As the name of this prize includes the name of a country, I would like to start out by talking about my concerns with the name Japan, the country. There are currently some 480,000 resident Koreans living in Japan due to various reasons, though they have citizenship in the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I am one of those resident Koreans.
私の両親は、朝鮮戦争時に難民となり、家財を持たず、身一つで小さな漁船に乗って海を渡り、日本に密入国しました。その時、母は5歳、父は15歳でした。2人とも高等教育は受けていません。父は日本語の読み書きすらできません。父はパチンコ屋に勤め、母はキャバレーのホステスをして、私たち4人の子供を養ってくれました。生活は常に苦しく、私は日本の最底辺に分類される家庭環境で育ちました。私にとっての母国は大韓民国だということになりますが、私は韓国で暮らしたことはないし、韓国語を話すこともできません。日本で生まれ育った私の母語は日本語です。日本語で読み書きをし、思考をするのも、睡眠時の夢の中に出てくる言葉も日本語なのです。
My parents became refugees during the Korean War and crossed the sea in small fishing boats, carrying nothing from their homes, and entered Japan illegally. My mother was 5 years old and my father 15. Neither received higher education. My father can't even read or write Japanese. My father worked in a pachinko parlor while my mother was a hostess in a cabaret in order to raise us 4 children. But their livelihood was meager, and I grew up in a family environment that was categorized as the lowest stratum of Japanese society. My home country is purported to be Korea, but I have never lived in Korea, and I don't speak Korean. Having been born and raised in Japan, my mother tongue is Japanese. I do my reading and writing in Japanese, and it is in Japanese that I form my thoughts and dream in my sleep.
父と母は日常的には日本語を使い、夫婦間で子供に聞かせられない内緒話をするときや、怒りや悲しみという負の感情がほとばしるときに韓国語を使っていました。私の記憶に残っている韓国語は、夜間の仕事を終えて帰宅した父と母が明け方疲れ果てて布団に潜り込むときに、深いため息とともに口にするあいごちゅっけったああ死にたいという言葉と、暴力を伴った喧嘩をするときに父母の口から飛び出すしっぱる、形石器、パーボー モンネミ、アイゴイヌムチャシー、イノマーなどの罵声語の数々です。
My father and mother spoke Japanese in normal daily life and used Korean when they spoke to each other about things they wanted to keep secret from us children, or when their emotions ran high with anger or sadness. The Korean that remains in my memory are words that my parents would utter with deep sighs when they crawled under the covers in the early morning, exhausted after returning from their nighttime work. Aigo chuteka, I want to die. And the abusive shouts that flew from my parents' mouths when they had their violent fights. Sorry for the pronunciation. Shipparu, keseki, pabo, monemi, aigo, numachashi, inoma. Those kinds of words.
父と母は戦争によって家境を失いました。家境とは人間が生存する上での経済的な拠り所であると同時に精神的な拠り所でもあるかけがえのない場所です。韓国での家境をなくし、流れ者、よそ者として日本で生きることになった父母は、私が10歳の時に離婚しました。絶えず不時着と離陸を繰り返すような緊張状態の中で、子供時代を過ごさなければならなかった私もまた、生まれながらの家境喪失者であり、家庭は常に多境でした。
My parents lost their homeland due to war. One's homeland is an irreplaceable place that forms an economic grounding for people to exist, and at the same time, it is where one's spirit is grounded. My parents, who had lost their homeland in Korea and had come to live in Japan as drifters and foreigners, divorced when I was 10 years old. Forced to live my childhood under tense conditions that seemed to constantly repeat crash landings and takeoffs, I also have been somebody who lost my homeland since birth, and at times my family was a foreign place for me.
夏休みの夕暮れ、私は7歳でした。セミの鳴き声が家の中にまで押し寄せていました。母が珍しく家にいるので、私は嬉しくなり、ねえママ、ねえママ、ねえと手当たり次第に思いついたことを話しかけていました。母は台所に立ち、包丁を握ってじゃがいもや人参や玉ねぎの皮を剥いたり、それを刻んだりしていました。母は私の声が聞こえていないかのように返事をせず、振り向いてもくれません。野菜を刻む包丁の音だけが響いています。と、突然、母は包丁と野菜を放り出し、うわっと大声で泣き出し、家の外に飛び出しました。私は母を追いかけました。母は家の前の通りで棒立ちになり、小さな子供のように手放しで泣きじゃくり、私には意味のわからない韓国語でうめいたり叫んだりしていました。母の口から出る韓国語で唯一意味が分かったのは、オンマーという言葉でした。オンマーというのはお母さんを意味する幼児語ですが、私は母をママと呼んでいて、オンマーと呼んだことは一度もありませんでした。
It was at dusk during summer vacation. I was 7 years old. The sound of the cicadas pressed all the way into the house. It was uncommon for my mother to be home at that time, and I was so happy I chattered away saying whatever came into my mind, saying, "Mom, say mom, mom, hey mom." My mother was standing in the kitchen, a knife in her hand, peeling potatoes, carrots, and onions, and chopping them up. As if she couldn't hear my voice, she didn't reply and wouldn't even turn to look at me. The only sound was the knife chopping the vegetables. Then suddenly she threw down the knife and vegetables and began to sob loudly and dashed out of the house. I rushed after her. My mother stood bolt upright in the street in front of our house and without holding back cried like a small child, moaning and shouting in Korean, which I couldn't understand. The one word I could catch from the Korean that my mother spoke was 엄마. 엄마 is a child's word meaning mommy, but I called my mother mama and never called her 엄마.
家の前は舗装されていない砂利道だったので、母の足はさぞかし痛いだろう。血が出ているかもしれない。どうして家の中ではなく家の外で泣いているんだろう。何がそんなに悲しいんだろう。もしかしたらこの家を一人で出て行ってしまうのではないかと恐れと不安でいっぱいでしたが、その気持ちを韓国語に翻訳することはできませんでした。私は母を慰めたくても慰めることができませんでした。私の言葉である日本語で母に話しかけることが不適切のように思われたのです。母に駆け寄ることも抱きつくこともできず、玄関先の少し離れた場所から黙って母を見つめていた7歳の私は、今も私の記憶の中に佇んでいます。
The street in front of our house was unpaved, and it was gravelly, so my mother's feet must hurt, and they may even be bleeding. Why was she crying outside the house and not inside? Would she run off alone, leaving our house? I was full of fear and anxiety, but I couldn't translate my feelings into Korean. Though I wanted to console her, I wasn't able to. It seemed inappropriate to talk to my mother in my language, Japanese. My 7-year-old self, who couldn't run up to my mother or hug her, and just watched her from the doorway a ways away, still lingers in my memory.
当時の私は小学校では激しいいじめに遭い、校内で言葉を発することができなくなっていました。いじめに遭っている最中の嫌だ、痛い、やめてという言葉を奥歯で噛み殺していました。クラス担任の教師に尋ねられた、お前は日本語を話せないのかという質問に対するいいえで済む短い返事すら恋になる前に口の中で溶けてしまいました。子供時代の私は言葉に挫折し深く傷ついていました。言葉とはなんと不自由なものだろうと。
In those days, I was being severely bullied in primary school, and I wasn't able to speak at school. While I was being bullied, I was clenching my teeth and swallowing words like, "Don't do that, that hurts," or "Stop it." To my homeroom teacher's question, "Can't you speak Japanese?" even a short answer like, "Yes, I can," would melt in my mouth before I could voice it. In my childhood, I was discouraged by words and deeply hurt. To me, it seemed that words were so wanting.
内戦や戦争が各国で勃発している現在、言葉もまた無傷ではありません。2つの国の狭間で生きる華僑創出者が2つの言語に心をヤスリのように削られ、その痛苦によって沈黙に係留され、沈黙の鎖をほどきながら書く。その物語は国家の内側から一つの穴をうがつような行為かもしれません。でも、その穴は内と外をつなぐ窓になりうるかもしれない。物語を読んでもらうことによって、その窓からしか見えない景色に目を向けてもらえるかもしれない。バークリー日本賞の受賞によって、その可能性が広がることを祈っています。ありがとうございました。Thank you.
In our present world, where civil wars and wars are breaking out in many countries, words also suffer wounds. Here is a person who has lost a homeland and lives in the gap between two countries. her heart shaved off by the file of 2 languages, chained to a mooring of silence from that pain, and writes by unclasping the chains of silence. Those stories may be like the act of drilling a hole from inside one country. That hole could become a window that connects the inside and outside. By having people read these stories, they may turn their gaze on the landscape that can only be seen from that window. I pray that this possibility may expand from my having received the Berkeley Japan Prize. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Andrew Leong. I'm an assistant professor of English at UC Berkeley, and it's my honor to moderate the next part of our program, which is a dialogue or discussion between YU Miri and our other honored guest, Karen Tei Yamashita. The sequence of the events will be as follows. I'll provide a more extended introduction of Professor Yamashita. We'll then go through 3 questions that we've prepared ahead of time, and then if time permits, we'll shift over to questions from the audience, more details then. So first, an introduction of Karen Tei Yamashita. Karen Tei Yamashita is a novelist, short story writer, playwright, and the Dixon Emeriti Professor of Literature and Creative Writing at the University of California, Santa Cruz. Although born in Oakland, California, Yamashita spent most of her childhood in Gardena, Los Angeles County, California. In college, Yamashita spent her junior year abroad at Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan, and after graduating and contemplating a career in anthropology, Yamashita received a Watson Fellowship and traveled to Sao Paulo in 1975 to research Japanese immigrant communities in Brazil. Yamashita would remain in Brazil for 9 years, moving back to California in 1984. She began a professorship at UC Santa Cruz in 1997, shortly after a 6-month stay in Seto, Japan. Over the course of a long career, Yamashita has written 8 books and counting, including I Hotel, a finalist for the National Book Award, and most recently, Sansei and Sensibility, all published by Coffee House Press. She is the recipient of the National Book Foundation 2021 Medal for Distinguished Contributions to Literature and a U.S. Artist Ford Foundation Fellowship. Please join me in welcoming Karen Tei Yamashita. So before diving into the dialogue, a few brief remarks on why we're so excited to bring Karen Tei Yamashita and YU Miri together in conversation. When thinking about authors in the world today who could speak most powerfully to the questions of Japanese and Korean diaspora, about migration, about imagination and the role of memory and the place of lost or fragmented languages, the 2 names that came together for us were YU Miri and Karen Tei Yamashita. I think even beyond thinking about just the scope of Japanese and Korean diasporas and literatures, when thinking about writers today who are really challenging the scope and reach of narrative form, of challenging readers to engage with difficult questions of history, memory, and the work of the imagination, the 2 writers you see right here are some of the best people that you could possibly see. So not bad for a Friday afternoon. Question 1 has to do with interviews and dialogue or drama formats. So for this first question, I want to draw together 2 common features of your work. First, for both of you, ethnography, whether through interviews or listening to the stories of community members, seems to have played a large role in each of your writing processes. Second, both of you have worked extensively in drama, theater, and performance. To list only a few examples from your large bodies of work. Karen, in 1975, you traveled to Brazil, and your second book, Brazil Maru, is based on interviews you conducted during that time. If audience members are curious about your theatrical work, they can also check out a collection called Anime Wong, that's A-N-I-M-E, Wong, Fictions of Performance. And Yu-san, one of your first works was a play, Seibutsuka, or Still Life, published in 1991. In 2012, you began hosting an interview show called YU Miri no Futari to Hitori, or YU Miri's 2 People and 1 Person, in which you spoke with people with ties to Minami-Soma, a community severely damaged by the triple disasters of March 11th, 2011. So the question is, how has the practice of interviewing or listening changed or strengthened your work as a dramatic artist? How has writing and developing performance work refined or changed your sensibilities as an interviewer or listener? And we'll start with Karen and then with Yu-san.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. I'm really pleased to be here, and I'm very, very honored to meet you, YU Miri. Okay, so to talk about when I went to Brazil in the 1970s, I went to study the Japanese immigration to Brazil. And I began the project as an anthropological project, and then eventually became evident to me that I would write a novel. I didn't know what that would mean, but I ended up doing that. And in the process, I met two communities there, a communal community there with about 100 people, 200 people, and I interviewed almost all of them. And in the beginning, I was interviewing them with a recorder, and I realized that my poor Japanese, because I was doing it in Japanese and Portuguese, I often didn't catch their answers. And and I would depend on the machine, the tape recorder, to tell me later what they had said. And I realized that this was not useful because I wasn't really listening and I wasn't asking questions at the time of their And so I abandoned the machine entirely. And instead of interviewing, I began to just listen. And I would spend hours listening very carefully, and then I would rush home or rush back to wherever I was and then record and write everything down that I remembered. And I believe that what happened was that I learned to listen for hours and also to use my body as a recorder. And in that process, I learned a great deal about what people were saying. I was trying to also record their vernacular, what they were saying, but also their speech and their syntax. And so that also, of course, translated probably to my writing of drama and also to dialogue. Is that enough? That's enough.
非常にこちらに今日お会いできて光栄です。私はブラジルに1970年代に行ってブラジルに移民した日系人を研究しました。まずは人類学的に研究してたんですけれど、そのうちこれを小説にしたいというふうに考えるようになりました。でも小説ってどういうものかも知らないままそういう決定をしました。私が住んでいた地域に200人ぐらいいたんですけれど、そのほとんどの人のインタビューをしました。まずはレコーダーを使って私の下手な日本語、下手なポルトガル語で質問をして、で彼たちの答えをレコーディングしたんですけれど、でも彼たちが言ってることは私はパッと受けることができなくて、でその機械に頼るっていうことになってしまって、で気がついたら実際に私は彼たちが言ってることを深く聞いてなかったっていうことに気がつきました。ですからもう機械をやめて、でその時にいろいろ聞いてまず私が質問できるようにするっていうことをしました。ですから何時間もそういう人たちが話することを聞いて、でその後私が泊まっていたところに走っていって、でそのノートを書くという方法を取りました。でそれから学んだことはその 聞くということ、そして実際に私の体が録音機レコーダーになるということです。で彼たちがどういう言い回しを使って喋っているのか、そしてどういうふうな話し言葉スピーチをやっているか、どういうふうに文章を作り上げるか、そういうことに気がつくようになりました。でそれが私が演劇などに使える、そして演劇のセリフなどに使えるようなことにつながったと思います。
非常に興味深い話で共通点が、見えてきたと思うんですけれども、まず短くあれですね、お渡しした方がいいですね。まず、私は、先ほどのスピーチの続きなんですけれども、16歳の時に高校を退学処分になって、以降学校というものに縁がないんですね。で18歳で演劇の世界に入りました。まず最初に俳優として舞台に立ち声を出すということを仕事にしたわけですけども、それは私の幼少期の体験から必然だったと思います。
We have some common points in our experiences. When I was 16, I was basically expelled from school and left school, and I didn't receive any more formal education after that. When I was 18, I joined a drama group, and the first thing that I had to do was to give voice to the lines that I had to say. And I think that is the kind of thing that came through what I experienced in my childhood.
それは先ほどスピーチでお話ししましたように、父母は韓国で生まれているので、韓国語が母語です。で父母と、日本語が母語の私が本音の部分では、語り合うことができないという状態だったんです、家庭の中で。そして、小学校ではいじめにあっていて声を出せないということがあったので、16歳の私がまず人の前に立ち、人のセリフで、声を出す、呼びかける、肉体的に、声で、触れ合うということが、必要だったのだと思います。
So as I mentioned earlier, my parents' mother tongue was Korean. So we couldn't really talk about anything deep and serious with each other because my mother tongue basically is Japanese. And also in school I was bullied, and so I was not able to give voice to my thoughts and feelings. So when at age 16 and 18, when I started working in the drama group, I could then express out loud what was in the dialogue of the plays. And I felt a real use of my body to be able to connect to other people through speaking.
それから、俳優を、2年で辞めて18歳の時に戯曲を書き始めました。で18歳から24歳までに10本の戯曲を書いて、上演し、それから小説の方に軸足を移しました。
So at age 18, I stopped being an actor on the stage, and I started writing dramas. And so between age 18 and 24, I actually wrote 10 plays. which were all put on by the dramatic group. And then at that point, I pivoted toward becoming a writer, a novelist.
そこから東日本大震災の2011年3月11日までのお話をするとすごく長くなるのでそこはお話ししません。で、2011年3月11日東日本大震災と、3月12日翌日から、原発の、水素爆発が相次ぎました。
So if I start talking about what happened since the March 11th, 2011 Great East Japan earthquake disaster, it will get too long, so I'll not talk about that much. But as you know, on the 11th there was the earthquake and tsunami, and on the 12th the nuclear power plant had an explosion.
で私当時神奈川県の鎌倉市で暮らしていて、主にテレビや、ラジオや新聞などで情報を見る。それは皆さんと同じ、情報の入手の仕方だったと思います。でその映像やニュースに接するたびに自分はなんて無力なんだろうというふうに打ちのめされました。
I was living in Kamakura at that time, and watching on the television, listening to the radio, reading the newspapers about the disaster, perhaps the same way you were getting the news of the disaster. And as I saw those images and read those accounts, I kept thinking how powerless I was.
私は医療従事者ではないので、現地に行って、傷ついた人の手当てをすることもできないし、自衛隊の方が行方不明者を捜索しているということもできない。で、私に何ができるだろうというのは2011年原発の周辺地域に通い続けて自問を続けたんです。そして、話を聞くということにたどり着きました。
I'm not a medical staff, so I couldn't care for the wounded. I wasn't part of the self-defense force that was looking for the missing. So I kept wondering, what could I do? What could I do? And what I came to realize what I could do was to listen.
私が仕事をしたのは、南相馬市原発から、20キロ圏内に一部入る小高区という場所が入ります。それから、原発から30キロぐらいの地域にある南相馬市で、臨時災害放送局というのが立ち上がったんです。それは地域のコミュニティ FM とは異なり、大きな災害が起きたときに臨時に立ち上がるラジオ放送局で、そこで、2人と1人という毎週金曜日の2人は地元の方、1人は私、地元の方のお二人のお話を聞く、私が聞くという番組を始めたのが2012年の2月からでした。
So I was able to begin working in Minami-Soma City, part of which was within the 20-kilometer radius of the nuclear power plant, and most of which was in the 30-kilometer radius. And there they had a temporary disaster radio station set up. This isn't like a local FM station that runs all the time. This is after particular disasters, a special type of radio station like this is set up. And on that radio station, we had the program, 2 people and 1 person. 2 people would be the local people, and 1 person would be myself.
臨時災害放送局なので通常は、2ヶ月ぐらいで閉局するのです。けれども福島の場合は、津波、地震、津波、原発事故、避難も長期にわたったし、避難民もいまだに4万人います。なので、2018年の3月25日まで続き、私は600人の方の地元の方のお話を収録しました。
So ordinarily, a radio station like that would be up for 2 months or so until the recovery was fairly substantial. But because it was such a large disaster of tsunami, earthquake, and nuclear power plant accident, the Fukushima disaster was so large that it also had very long-term evacuees. There are still 40,000 people who have evacuated and have not been able to return. And so this radio station went on for a long time until March 25th, 2018.
2018年。
March 25th, 2018.
先ほどカレンさんがお話になった話と共通する部分でもあるんですけれども、地元の方という方たちは、被災者として、他地域、主に東京から大量のマスコミが訪れてテレビや新聞や週刊誌の人々が押し寄せて、材料を取材される、さまざまなことを聞き出される、材料を取られるということに深く傷ついていた方が多かったんです。
So I think there's something in common with what Karen mentioned, but the local residents who lived there were as victims of the disasters. Many television stations, newspapers, magazines, the mass media from Tokyo and other urban areas would come to ask them questions, to interview them, and to take material from them. And I think, and they felt very used and very upset and hurt by that kind of act.
だから私がその2人と1人という番組は私がほとんど喋ってないんです。
In the program that I had, 2 people and 1 person, I hardly talk at all.
ただ聞いている。
I just listen to them.
でも、なんか聞くということは受け身のようなふうに思われるのだけれども、そうではないんですよね。お話になった方の聞いているよという、レスポンス、じっと聞くというのは私は強い行為だと思っています。
So in the listening, the act of listening may seem to be a passive act, but I don't think so. I think in listening we can give a response, and I think it's a very strong behavior and act that we can do for them.
日本語で肉声って書くんですけども、肉体の肉に声ですね。
In Japanese, we have a word nikusei, which means the actual physical voice, the body's voice.
こう一つの空間で、私の声帯と舌を使って、今声にしています。で、皆さんの、鼓膜を声が震わせて、脳に信号がいって意味として理解するというものすごく肉体的なやり取りなんですね。ですから、その600人の方との肉体的なやり取りを繰り返した中で、 JR 上野駅公園口という作品や街の形見という、その地元の方が、実際に舞台に上がって、俳優と共に、芝居を作ったんですけれども、街の形見という作品や、ある晴れた日にというその亡くなった行方不明になった、恋人婚約者を待ち続けている女性の話の3つの作品が生まれました。長くなりました。
So when we're actually in the same room, then what I say with my voice, using my voice box and my tongue, is received by your eardrum, and then the signal goes to your brain, and it's a very physical act of actually conversing or having a dialogue. And I did this with 600 people during those years that I worked on that program. And from that, works like Tokyo Ueno Station, and then some dramatic works like Keepsakes of the Town or On a Clear Day, which the latter was about a person who lost his lover and was searching for his lover. Those kinds of works were born from that. Sorry, I went a little too long.
Thank you so much. I want to pick up this thread about listening with the body, not just as a passive act, but maybe as a moving and active act, to think about the next question, which is that both of your works seem to foreground movement or bodies in movement. And this is not just at the grand scale of international migration, but also at the everyday scale of daily commutes and traffic. So Yu-san, this is apparent from some of your titles, including a cycle of novels and stories that are all named after JR or Japan Railway train stations, and the sounds of trains and how they work make important appearances in more recent works like Diamond Pigeon, the sequel to Gold Rush. Karen, lots of examples come to mind, maybe even from iHotel, but one of the most iconic for your readers might be the image of Manzanar Murakami in your novel Tropic of Orange. There, Manzanar is a homeless former doctor who conducts the freeway traffic of Los Angeles as a symphony, a kind of maestro work of listening with and conducting with the body. So the question here is, why trains and train stations? Why freeways? And how does the routine or everyday violence and danger of travel provide your characters and narrators with ways of seeing and describing larger or more hidden structures of violence? Maybe Yu-san first.
私です。そうですね。JR 上野駅公園口は、山手線の駅名をタイトルにした、小説の連作の5作目なのです。
The Tokyo Ueno Station is the fifth in a line of works that I have written that deal with the Yamanote line in Tokyo.
で、その山手線の連作の、テーマは、自殺です。
And the theme of that series is suicide.
日本では毎年2万人以上の人が自殺によって亡くなっています。で、10代の一番多い死因は自殺です。
In Japan, the suicides per year are number 20,000. And for people in their tens and teens, the main reason for death is by suicide.
私は神奈川県の鎌倉に住んでいた時に、東京に電車に乗る、東京に行く時に電車に乗るわけですけども、たびたび人身事故で電車が止まったんです。人身事故、人の身の事故というふうに書くんですけども。
When I was living in Kamakura, I would often go to Tokyo on the train, and there were quite a few times when the trains would be delayed because there was a person's body accident. They had this way of saying that it wasn't necessarily a death, but that there was a medical accident type of way of saying it.
それはもうみんな慣れてしまっている。たびたび起こりすぎて、ある人は時計を見て舌打ちをする、遅くなるという、仕事が遅くなるというふうに舌打ちをする。ある人はため息をつく。ある人は窓の外を見て、電車が動き出すのを耐えている、スマートフォンを見る人もいます。けれども、それは異様な光景なのではないかというふうに私は思いました。
But people have, the train riders have become used to this because it happens somewhat often. So some of them look at their watch and cluck their tongues saying, I'm going to be late for work. Others sigh. Others look out the window and wait for the train to move again. Or people look at their smartphones to pass the time until the trains start moving again. But I think this is a very kind of abnormal type of situation.
駅の外にはその自殺をした人の日常生活や家や仕事があり、ある時もう死ぬしかないというふうに追い詰められて、電車の駅の改札口をくぐって、日本の電車には黄色い視覚障害者のための、ブロックの線があるんですけども、そこに立ち、電車が来たという、電車が来ます、危ないですから黄色い線の内側までお下がりくださいというアナウンスが流れた時に、近づいてきた電車に飛び込むという光景を想像した時に、私は日本で、この世とあの世、悲願というふうに表しますけども、そこがもうこの世のあの世を超えるラインに見えたんですね。で、電車の線路は三途の川に見えたんです。で、それが、山手線の、連作を始めるきっかけとなったんです。でもこの間本を読んだら、熱帯雨林の彼方へで、主人公が山手線に乗って、線路の細かい割れなどを、超能力的に、なんていうんでしょう、検査チェック気づくことができるという記述を読んで、なんか不思議な縁を感じました。
But with that station as a hub, the person who commits suicide had a life outside the station, had a house, had lived somewhere, was living somewhere, and was working somewhere nearby. And then when that person decides he or she is going to die, they pass through the gate onto the platform, and then go to the edge of the platform where they have that yellow bumpy line for blind people, and stand there and then wait until they hear the announcement that to please stand behind the yellow line because a train is coming, and then they jump onto the track to commit suicide. And when I imagined this scene, I thought that this location was the division between this world and the other world. And the actual train tracks were like the river Styx where you pass over into the other world. That gave me the idea to use that as the theme for the series of stories. And when I read in Karen Yamashita's book about checking the tracks, etc., I felt like there's certainly a common idea there.
I lived in Japan in, I think maybe before you were born, in 1973, and I lived in Ikebukuro, and I took the Yamanote Sen, and those of us who were going to school at Waseda, we thought, well, if we missed our stop, we could just keep going around. It would take forever. But some of us did it. You know, we'd fall asleep, and then we'd go, oh, okay, we'll just continue to go around. And I was so shocked when I returned to Japan in the 90s to find that the Yamanote was just one. There were so many other ways to, that the subways were crisscrossing up and down and far below the ground in Tokyo by then. I guess you want me to stop.
まず1973年に最初に日本に行ったんですけれど、その時早稲田に通っていて、で池袋へ行くのに山手線に乗るということで、でももしその駅をミスしてしまったらずっと乗ってれば長い間かかるけれどまた戻ってくるっていうようなことで、まあなんとかそれもしましたけれど。で1990年代に行った時に山手線だけじゃなく他の線もあると、そして地下鉄ももっとその頃よりはたくさんあってかなり深いところの地下鉄もあるということに驚かされました。
And so but it's impossible to go to Tokyo or Japan and not notice the railroad system. It's ubiquitous, and it's the way you get around Japan. So I wanted to write, of course, about that when I wrote that book. But then when I came to Los Angeles, then the transportation is over freeways, and every morning I had to take. Either I did a ride share with a friend, but we would have to go across the Harbor Freeway from where I lived, and it would take about an hour every morning because of the traffic to go to my work. And many times we were kind of stopped in traffic. And I think the same way that you have this sense on trains that you are in a public space, but people are very private in their lives. And on a freeway, you can be in your car driving very slowly, and people are very private. They're doing private things in their cars. It's kind of surprising what you might see people doing, whether they are putting on their makeup or brushing their teeth or they're doing really strange things in the car. And so it occurs to me that for me, being in these public spaces, which are also private, that you also begin to think about what those people, who they are in those private spaces, who they are, what their stories are, and as writers, we begin to imagine what their lives are like. And also because the train, as you say, for that system is a place of suicides. But the freeways in Los Angeles are very dangerous places, and why would you be shaving? But you could get killed, and lose your life very instantly.
で、日本では非常に電車、汽車を乗っていろいろ 動き回れるっていうことが重要だということが一つの理由、一つの理由でこの本を書くということですね、しました。で、ロサンゼルスに住み始めて、でロサンゼルスでは高速道路を車で走るっていうのが普通です。で、私はそれを他の人とライドシェアをしてた時もあるんですけれど、1時間ぐらい運転して、仕事に行くというのが通常ですね。渋滞などがあるので、でそういう渋滞で止まってる時もありますし、そういう非常にパブリックの空間なんですけれど、そのプライベートなことをやってる人たち、車の中では、お化粧したり、歯を磨いたり、そういうちょっとそれを運転しながらやってると。ですからそういうふうにプライベートなことを垣間見れるということですね。でその人たちがどういう人かなとか、どういう人生を送ってるとか、どういうストーリーがその裏にあるのかなっていうようなことを私はいろいろ想像することができました。で言われたようにその列車の方で自殺をするっていうこともできますけれど、フリーウェイも非常に危険なところなんですのに、それなのになぜそんなところでひげ剃りをするとかね、歯を磨いたりそういうことをするのかっていうのがちょっと疑問っていうこともあります。
Okay, the last question has to do with signs and translation. So some of my favorite scenes in your work have to do with Japanese municipal signs that try very hard to be clear to their readers, but in doing so end up being unintentionally more confusing or funny. So Karen, in Circle K Cycles, which is a book about Brazilian Japanese dekasegi in Japan, you have, or migrant workers, sorry, in Japan, you have a hilarious sequence that pokes fun at the tone of Japanese residential condominium announcements, which is then translated into Portuguese and then translated by you into English, so that it results in things like, let's stop driving motorcycles at high speeds. Let's stop barbecuing on the veranda, if you could have tone like that. And then Yusan in Tokyo Ueno Station, the narrator describes signs put up by Ueno Park Management to instruct homeless residents of a tent village. And the management assumes that most homeless people have barely had an elementary school education. And thus, in the Japanese text, kanji, or Chinese characters, are followed by parentheses and then the phonetic transcription in hiragana. And your English language translator rendered this as doing phrases like, put only necessary, parentheses, needed, items in your bag. Do not overfill, parentheses, make it too heavy, producing really ridiculously difficult to read sentences. So both of your works foreground this problem of language and translation, where sometimes trying to make things easier on people actually makes them more difficult to understand, and sometimes where the use of challenging or more difficult or experimental forms can actually make life easier to understand. So how do you think about the representation of multiple languages or of translation with within your work? And let's see. Let's start with Karen this time.
So the book you're talking about, Circle K Cycles, was it was really to look at the community of Brazilians who are now, or who were then, especially in the 90s when I visited, living in Japan as dekasegi. And they were there to work in the factories, and the Japanese government had given them special visas in order to bring them so that they could work in factories that make things like televisions and cars and motorcycles and electronic goods. And the Brazilians were Japanese Brazilians were invited because they looked like Japanese. So it was sort of an idea that it would be comfortable. But when you bring Brazilians, halfway around the world to a place like Japan, even though they are of Japanese descent, they were culturally very, very different people. Some of them had some Japanese language ability. However, most of them spoke only Portuguese, and they would have to translate things from the Portuguese to the English, which is kind of possible in Japan, especially Tokyo, but not other places in Japan, and then to Japanese. And in my book, what I wanted to also represent was the confusion that you might feel, or these people felt in trying to figure out how to run their lives and live in Japan.
このサークル系サイクルは、ブラジルから、1997年あたりに日本に労働者としてビザをもらって行った人たちですね。で、その労働者はテレビとか自動車、モーターバイクとかいろいろ電気製品、電化製品、そういうものを作っている工場で働くっていうことで、日系ブラジル人だから日本人みたいに見えるっていうことで、日本の方も受け入れ側としてはその方がやりやすいということでした。でももちろんブラジル人ですから文化的とかそういうふうには非常に異なっている状況だということで、その中には少し日本語できるような人たちもいましたけれど、ほぼ普通多い人はポルトガル語ですね。ですから日本ではポルトガルから日本語っていうのはちょっと無理なので、ポルトガルから英語そして日本語っていうような生き方で、大都市では英語が通じる時もありますけれど、小さな町だとそれは通じないという問題もあります。ですから彼たちの困惑ですね、どういうふうに日本で住めばいいのか、どういう文化的な調和ができるのかということが問題でした。それが言葉とか翻訳についての答え。
So well, I guess when
What was it?
So what I wanted to represent in a book form was what it would be like to live in a translated world. And so I think of that space, the translation as a translated space. Also, it's a version. So the translation of a work is a version. It's not necessarily what it is. But it's without it, we cannot begin to understand or to learn from or to know another people. Yeah.
で、本としてはそういう翻訳された世界に生きるのはどういうものかっていうことを追求したと思います。でも翻訳っていうのはある作品の一つのバージョンで、その元のものと全く同じではないということが一つの問題ですね。でもそういう翻訳がなければ我々お互いに理解することができない、そういう非常に狭い国、世界になってしまうというような問題があるということで、翻訳とかそういうふうに翻訳されたものは必要なものだと、そういう考えです。
So I feel, I went to Brazil and I wrote about Japanese living in Brazil in English. And the folks for whom I wrote that and about whom I wrote cannot read what I wrote. And at the same time, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I should be able to speak Japanese. I went to Japanese school, but I'm really lousy at it, and I can kind of understand what you're saying, but I'm feeling that English is my language. It is my mother tongue, and yeah, so I feel your difficulty that we do live in these spaces, and then as people who are Asian in this country, we live in a space in which we're always foreigners, despite the fact that I'm third generation Japanese in America.
で、私はブラジルに行って日系ブラジル人、について英語で本を書きましたね。ですから私が取材というかインタビューした人たち、は読めないんです、私が書いた本を。で私もいくらか日本語なども勉強したんですけれど、もっと本当に日本語を話せるべきなのに、下手な日本語になってしまうと、そういうことがあります。ですから英語っていうのが私の母語ですね。でそういうふうに母語を使ってでも周りには他の言葉があるっていうのが非常に困難なことっていうのは非常に痛感しますっていうことですね。で、アジア系アメリカ人ということになりますと、私たちは常に外国人として見なされてしまうんです。私も賛成なんですけれど、まだ何か一般のアメリカから見ればちょっと外国人というふうに見られることがある。どうぞ。
そうですね。私は看板などの現実にある文字情報を山手線の連作では、そのまま引用する形で、入れているんですけども、それはなぜかというと、登場人物が今6作品書いたかな、連作のでまだ完結してないんですけども、全員死のうとしている。死のうとしている人間がどのような精神状態であるかというのを考えたときに、通常の普通の状態、生きようとしている状態ですと、街を歩いているときに全ての音やものが暴力的に自分の中に侵入してくるわけではなくて、選択して見て選択して聞いているんですけれども、自分という主体が壊れた時、あるいはひび割れたりした時に、音や、看板やさまざまな色や、人々が、通りすがる、声、自分とは関係ない会話などが暴力的に自分の中に侵入してくるというイメージで、山手線の連作ではそのような表現を選びました。
So regarding signs, what I use in the series that deals with Yamanote Line, I use actual signs and I cite them directly. And I'm working on 6 books now for the Yamate-san series. But the main character in each of these is somebody who wants to die. And so my purpose is to figure out what kind of psychological state is somebody in when they want to die. So all of us who are wanting to live and who are moving around normally, we see all these sights and sounds around us, but we filter them. We select what we catch. But when our self is fractured and we're in a very unstable psychological state, each sign, sound, colors, conversations, they all come violently into the self. And so it's that kind of state that I wanted to show in writing those signs and reflecting those signs directly.
2つの言語という意味では8月の果てという作品が私の現時点での代表作だと思っているのですが、来年同じ JR 上野駅と同じ翻訳者モーガン・ジャイルズによって英訳をされます。
In terms of languages, I would like to point to the end of August, which is, I think, my main representative work. And it will be translated next year and out next year. And the translator is Morgan Giles, the same one who did Tokyo Ueno Station.
8月の果ては日本の植民地下にある朝鮮を描いています。
The end of August depicts Korea under Japanese occupation.
祖父が私のマラソンランナーだった祖父が育った時代というのは、朝鮮語を話すことが禁じられていたのです。で、学校では日本語を教えられていたので、祖父の世代の子どもたちは日本語をしゃべり、で家では、祖父母は家の中では、朝鮮語をしゃべっているという状態でした。
So it features my grandfather, the marathon runner, and in that age, they were forbidden to, while under Japanese occupation, they were forbidden to speak Korean. They were taught Japanese in school. So they would be learning, children would be learning Japanese in school, and then at home, within the household, they would be speaking Korean.
言葉だけではなくて、名前も、例えば私の母だったら、ヤンヨンヒという名前なんですけども、柳川よし子というような日本名に変えなければならなかったのです。
And it wasn't just language, but it was also names. For example, my mother's name was Yang Yong-hee in Korean, but they changed it to Yanagawa Yoshiko to make it sound Japanese.
その時代を描いた作品なので、その2つの言語をそのまま作品に書いたのが8月の果てなのですが、どのように英訳、私の作品の中で最も翻訳が難しい作品だと思います。どのように訳されているのか、またそれがどのように読者に伝わるのか、非常に楽しみです。
So the book is written in 2 languages, the end of August, that book. So I think it'd be very difficult to translate into English. And I'm very curious as to see how the translator will do this and how the readers will receive it, what kind of response the readers will have when they read it.
それで最後の質問の翻訳についてどう考えるかというご質問なんですけれども、私は実は、今このように私の母語である日本語で話していることも私の言葉にならない気持ち、沈黙を翻訳しているというふうに考えています。
So in terms of translation, for myself, the Japanese that I'm speaking now is a translation of the kinds of thoughts and feelings that I have that I can't really put into words.
ですから言葉に物語になる前のイメージというのがあるんですね。私の場合、言葉になる前に例えば私の祖父が故郷であるキョンサン南道ミリアンの ミリャン川という川べりを走っている姿であるとか、それをどのように翻訳するのか、言葉に置き換えるのかということで作品を作っていくのです。
So when I think of a story to write about, I first have an image. For example, I have an image of my grandfather running along the river in Miryang, where he lived in Korea, and how to replace that image with words is my first task.
ですから私は翻訳家がその私の翻訳する前に、言葉にする前に持っていたイメージに触れることができるならば、それは同じイメージを共有するというか、その作品は翻訳作品は成功するというふうに考えてます。
So if the translator can think about the image before I put it into words, and if we can share that image, then I think the translation would be successful.
Okay, thank you very much, and let's have a round of applause for...
And 3 cheers for the interpreter.